want to celebrate something real quick. I want to give you an update and a report on our foster teen outreach. Those of you that have been around, kind of right after Thanksgiving, we launched to bless the foster teens in the state of Ohio. It started out, started partnering with Franklin County Children's Services. We're like, what's the biggest unmet need? We've got this church of people, like, we want to do something good. We don't want to waste our time and energy and money, but what can we do? And they said, foster teens are overlooked every year. Like, little kids will get toys, but foster teens who are coming to grips with their reality usually don't get anything, and they need someone to show up for them. We're like, okay, what do we do? They said $25 gift cards to Amazon or Target or whatever, they can get their own stuff. And so we did that 2 years ago, and you guys gave enough that we were able to actually give every foster teen in our county 3 gift cards, and then handwritten Christmas card. And so then we said, well, man, maybe if we collaborate with like businesses and business people and other churches, we could do this in the whole state. So that's what we've been doing the last 2 years. And so we've had a number of businesses and people, individual donors, people just showing up to help the foster teens. And I want to say this. I think the fact that we're doing this consistently is a big deal. Think about a group of people that are really learning how to trust anybody. And for the church to go, hey, we're back, like we're helping you. I think it's just part of breaking through. And so I'm ready to tell you like what we did. Okay, so I'm gonna give you 2 numbers. One is what we just did, one church, like as a church, and then what we did with the partners around the state of Ohio. So just as a church, like you guys, in person and online, well, here's what came in, $175,887, which is 7,035 gift cards, okay? Just to let you know, like, there's about 5,000 foster teens in the state, so you hit the foster teens 1.5 times. Then we were able to partner with these other people, and together we were able to do $274,012, which is almost 11,000 gift cards. So what that means is every foster teen in the state of Ohio is going to get $50 worth of gift cards, and actually the ones within our county are going to get 3 gift cards because of your generosity. Amazing, amazing. I want to say, like, I think when it comes to pride, there's 2 kinds of pride. There's like the 7 deadly sin kind of pride that will rot your soul. But then there's that other kind of pride that's like good, right? Like you're like, good job, like job well done. I'm proud of you. And I just want to say I'm thankful for this church. I'm proud of this church. I'm honored to be among you. God bless you. Thank you. Job well done. Job well done. Come on, give yourselves a hand. God bless you. I'm going to jump into the message. We're in a series right now called The Family Tree. And we're taking this out of Matthew chapter 1. The first 16 verses are 14 generations of a genealogy leading up to Jesus. And it seems like a throwaway text until you understand the depth of the text is actually really 2 things. One, it is the writer Matthew making a case for, or basically proving, the veracity of Jesus as the Messiah. A lot of the prophecies that came about the Messiah were proven through this genealogy. He's like, let me show you scientifically, this is the dude. The second thing that I think really makes this whole text pop are the names that are named in parentheses, 4 women that are specifically named. And the whole purpose was Matthew wanted you to look into the story. Matthew wanted you to go deeper. And each of these stories, when you look at it, are ones that if it was in you and I's family tree, we might be tempted to try to bury these deep in the closet, to actually not want anyone to know. And yet Matthew goes out of his way to mention Rahab, Tamar, Ruth, and now Bathsheba, who we're going to look at in Matthew chapter 1, which gives us a lot of hope and optimism for ourselves as to what God is able to do with your life and mine. If you have some drama in your life today, I have good news for you. Jesus had drama in his family tree also. If I could give you one gift, by the way, before we even read the text, if I could give you one gift today, it would be that you would begin to raise in your mind the expectation about the possibility of what God can still do in your life. What God can still do in your life. If I could give you the gift, I would, but I can't. So it's a gift you have to give to yourself. It's a gift you have to give to yourself to begin to raise the bar and raise the expectation of what God can still do with your life. The operative word there is still. is still. But before we started One Church, I worked with youth for years. I was a youth pastor. I loved the job. It was a great job. And it never ceased to amaze me how young people, I'm talking 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, who had gone through hard things, who had done things they regretted or had things done to them that were reprehensible, how they would conclude based on how they got to where they are, that their life was ruined, that their future was doomed. And they would bare their soul to me, and I would hear them essentially feeling hopeless about the future. And I would turn my hat backwards and give them the pep talk that you would give them. Come on, young person, you're 14 years old. You got a lot of life left to live. There's a lot of decades in front of you. There's a lot of the story that's still being written. And I would preach and spit and sweat and try to inspire them to be optimistic about the future, but it never ceased to amaze me how downcast a 15-year-old would get, feeling that the future was hopeless. And I've got to tell you, I think that lie that the enemy loves to chirp into our ears, that based on what we've been through or what we've done, that we are doomed for the future, I think that lie becomes easier to believe over time, the older you get, because you start doing the math on the years. You're going, it took me 50 years to screw my life up. What's God gonna do? I'm running out of time. The scales have tipped. And so I think as much as we can look at what seems to be the lack of logic around a 14 to 15-year-old child that would look at their future and think it's doomed, I think the reality is we have to come to grips with the fact that the same lie that's fed to the 16-year-old is also fed to the 60-year-old. And as a 60-year-old, you may be sitting here today thinking that God can't do anything with your life. And if I could give you a gift, it would be for you to raise the expectation of what God can still do with your life. One of the great stories that we have here in Matthew 1 and 6, and I want to just read what seems to be a throwaway verse, but is not. Matthew 1 and 6 is in the genealogy, says Jesse was the father of King David. And then it says David was the father of Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba. And look at this. Next it says, the widow of Uriah. I want to tell you the story of Bathsheba, but it would be impossible for me to do this right without telling you about David and about Uriah. David was the second king in the nation of Israel. And the way they even came about having a king, like we think about kings and powerful people, and it's just kind of part of the power structure. And we know different governments in different eras over time did things different ways. But the nation decided they want a king. They wanted a king. And before they had the first king, who was Saul, they had a period of 400 years of what was called the judges. The judges were, don't think like Judge Judy or Judge Joe Brown. I want you to think about like these are leaders that God would raise up to solve a problem or to do something, and then they would go back to obscurity. They didn't become enthroned as king. They would be used for a purpose by God, and then they would go back to what they were doing. But the nation looked around at other nations, and they were like, man, everybody else has a king, and these kings are pretty charismatic, and these kings seem really powerful, and we want a king. And God tries to talk them out of it. But they win the argument with God. Have you ever won an argument with God? If you win an argument with God, you lose. You don't want to win an argument with God. But they won. And God said to them, hey, I want you to think about this. Like, kings are bad ideas. Men should not be kings. If your men are kings, even the good men are going to screw it up. Go read the Old Testament, friend. It's one bad king after another. And even the good dudes were corrupted. Why? Because absolute power corrupts absolutely. You put this man in the palace, you give him full control, he goes unchecked. He will start to satiate his desires however he darn well pleases. He will take your sons and he'll make them subjects. He will take your daughters and do God knows what. You don't want a king, God tells them. And they said, no, we want a king. And so they won the debate. So they have Saul, and Saul starts out actually as anointed by God, and he has a new heart, and he starts out really good, but Saul starts to get high on his own success. He starts to get high on his own supply. He starts to read his own press and feel good about himself. And so he thinks that the military victories and the economic success that he's having is because he's so strategic, and he's so enlightened, and he's so powerful. Meanwhile, God was delivering victory to him. Saul thought he was the king instead of God. And although God gave him chances to repent and change course and come back to his roots, he didn't do it. And so the Bible says in 1 Samuel that God began looking for his replacement. And it says in 1 Samuel 13 and 14, it says the Lord sought out a man after his own heart. Acts 13:22 said God removed Saul and replaced him with David, a man about whom God said, don't miss this, I have found David, I have found a man after my own heart. Don't miss this. What attracted God to David was his heart. What caused God to notice David was his heart. It was not his talent, it was not his ability, his prowess, his charisma, his magnetism. It was the depth of his heart. It was the softness of his heart. And so we see that David is found in a sheep field. At this time, he's a shepherd. And God finds him in an unlikely place, and he gives him this amazing responsibility. In the period of time from when David was anointed king to when he was enthroned as king, he went through a process of taking that heart and putting it to good work. We see in 1 Samuel 22, 1 and 2, says that David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And soon his brothers and all his relatives joined him there. That's a deeper text than you think, because when it says his family and his relatives joined him there, you would think, well, of course his family's gonna show up because they are his family. That's his support system. But when you look in David's backstory, his family, his closest family members are the ones that wounded him. His closest family members were the ones that hurt him. If you've been hurt by brothers and sisters, if you've been hurt by mom and dad, you have something in common with David. These were the people that had wounded him the most and that were the hardest to forgive. So the fact that his family was restored in 1 Samuel 22 in verse 1 shows us even the heart of David, that he was willing when he had power to, instead of wielding the power to hurt those who hurt him, he accepted them back and reconciled. In verse 2 it says, then look at this, after his family, others began coming also, men who were in trouble or in debt or who were just discontented, until David was captain of about 400 men. The reason I read you this text is because we start to see how David, as a leader, begins to expand his influence. It's because of his heart. It says the misfits. I mean, it was like the island of misfit toys, okay? It was people who were in debt, people who were discontent, people who were in pain, started to see this leader as someone who was for him, who was for them, who was there to serve them. And so now his influence grows and grows and grows and grows. Eventually, David becomes king, and he begins to experience victory. And what starts to happen is a slow but steady deterioration of his heart. The very thing that caused God to notice him, the very thing that got him to where he was something he began to lose. If you're an ambitious person in the house, by the way, that is not a bad thing. You don't need to be embarrassed about that. You don't need to feel guilty about that. The Bible does not discourage you from ambition. The Bible discourages you from selfish ambition. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. But if you're a driven person and you want to like take over and you like to be in charge, that's okay. But you have to do it with wisdom. You have to do it with wisdom. You need to know that as you accelerate in life and as you ascend and you go to higher places and your influence becomes greater and you start learning new skills and new ways of thinking, you got to know the difference between thinking that needs to change and develop and things that need to be protected. There are certain things in terms of strategies and systems that need to change as you go up. What got you here won't get you there in a sense. The plan that got you to this place, yes, you'll have to tweak it and you'll have to think new and fresh and always be on a new horizon. Things will always be changing, but you better know the difference between the things that need to change and the things that need to be protected. And so David, as he began to go up, he started to dehumanize people. He started to see people as numbers, or he started to see people as a profile instead of seeing people as people. the thing that he initially got him to where he was, he started to lose that. I'm going to tell you, because we live in a world that the more successful you get, there starts to become this belief that not everybody can go there. You got to kind of be a savage to do so. You got to be willing to throw people on the chopping block. You've got to be willing to do things others won't do. Not everybody has the stomach to be a leader. Not everybody, and in a sense, yes, sometimes as a leader you have to make hard calls, and sometimes you're in catch-22s and all of this, but you should never lose the heart for people, to see people as people. In fact, if you look really at even world history, a lot of the biggest atrocities came when leaders started seeing people not as people, they began to dehumanize. Think about Adolf Hitler when he was trying to exterminate the Jews. He didn't call them people, he called them rats. He called them vermin. Why? Well, because you don't mind killing a rat. So once you start to dehumanize an individual, you'll start to do things that you didn't think you were capable of. And this, my friend, is what begins to happen in the heart of David. We get to 2 Samuel chapter 11, and look what happens. 2 Samuel chapter 11, it says, in the spring of the year, when the kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab. He delegated something he was supposed to go participate in. And so he sent Joab and the Israelite army to the Ammonites, and they destroyed the Ammonite army, and they laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got up out of bed and was walking on the roof of the palace. And as he looked over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. And he sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah. Notice that the nation had set up a system, put a system in place to try to cultivate the heart of the leader. And the part of that system was that annually there was a time that the king went to war. Well, why would that nurture the heart of the leader? The reason that nurtures the heart of the leader is because you lead differently when you actually go to war, okay? If all you do is send people to war and go, yeah, where are we going? Show me a map. If it's just maps and numbers, you're just like, yeah, sure, go to Rabbah. Yeah, go get those Ammonites. Go get them. When you're at war, you're like, whoa, like that arrow just went past your head. It's one thing to get a report, 100 men died in Rabbah. It's another thing when you see 100 corpses with your own eyes. It's another thing when you taste blood in your own mouth. When you see death, when you smell death, when you're in the trenches, you lead differently. So they set it up once a year. This man's gonna go taste the battle, so he leads with the right heart. And David made a decision to not do so. And so what it did was it became easier to dehumanize. He sees Bathsheba. He's up, walking around the roof, sees this woman taking a bath. I've heard people say, well, what's up with Bathsheba? She was taking a bath in full view. Bro, read verse 1. He was supposed to be at war. For all she knew, the king was actually doing his job. This is the time of year she didn't know she's being watched. And now you have the king, by the way, who now sees a person in a vulnerable position. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You learn a lot about how you view people with what you do when they're in a vulnerable position. Do you take advantage of them or do you protect them? She was in a vulnerable position. He sends a messenger. He could have sent a messenger to say, hey, Bathsheba, you're vulnerable. Just so you know, you think nobody sees you, but you're being seen. You might want to cover up or find a more private place or get a curtain for your shower. But what does he do? He sends a messenger to find out who she is. He's asking about her. Why? Because he saw her and he lusted after her and he wanted her. It's not necessarily wrong to be tempted. The New Testament tells us about that. Temptation is normal. But when temptation takes root and leads to sinful action leads to death. In other words, you can't control the birds that fly around your head, but you can control the birds that nest in your hair. What are you going to do when the thought comes? So now he has temptation that hits him, and instead of protecting the vulnerable, he goes and asks about her. Now look what he gets here. He gets essentially a very well-crafted warning from his messenger. Look what his messenger does. Read this again in verse 3. He sent someone to find out who she was, and he was told, look at this, she is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah. The messenger takes David, who is on a crash course with dehumanizing someone, and brings back her humanity. Hey, that's not just the hot lady at 522 Lust Boulevard. That is Bathsheba. She has a name, and she has a dad, Eliam. That's his daughter, and she has a husband, Uriah. He has a name also. So he attempts to humanize the woman again. And yet David is so locked in. He is really beginning to cascade. And so because of this, he totally ignores the heart palpitation. When you think about heart health, okay, as we're talking about here metaphorically, I want you to think about it literally. Heart health. Think about your actual heart, the organ. Think about the thing that's pumping blood through your veins. Your heart health is really based on what you do day in and day out over long periods of time. It's what you put in your body or don't put in your body. It's what you do with your body in terms of exercise or a lack thereof. And yet we don't exactly know what's going on inside until sometimes a catastrophic event, a heart attack. Sometimes you'll get a warning, a heart palpitation, like something ain't right. Something ain't right. And it's giving you a warning, and then there's the catastrophic event. All throughout life, we are really asking two questions. We're trying to figure out two things. I'm trying to figure out who you are, and I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm trying to figure out who you are. You ever had somebody, you're in a relationship with them, you're working with them, you're trying to figure out who are they for real? Who are they for real? Some of you have been dating for a very long time, and what's keeping you from making a commitment is you're just not totally sure. Who are you? Like, I like you. I would go to prom with you. This is not prom. This is where we're gonna die spooning in a nursing home somewhere where I'm gonna be taking road trips with you. I'm trying to figure out who are you? Who are you for real? Maya Angelou famously said, if somebody shows you who they really are, believe them. Some of you have stories of people who showed you who they were and you didn't believe them. You didn't believe them. Like, no, that's not the real them. Oh, it was. People warned you. Hey, anybody who will cheat with you will cheat on you. And they're cheating with you and you thought, oh, no, but I'm different. This is different. This isn't the real them. And then they cheat on you and you're like, oh. Believe them, we're told. Believe them. You're trying to figure out who they are, but you're trying to figure out who you are. Who am I? Have you ever had a bit of an identity crisis? Right? It says in Proverbs 4, it says, guard your heart above all else. It determines the course of your life. And then Jesus says two different times, essentially, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Have you ever had something come out of your mouth and you're like, whoa, that was in there? Who am I? Who am I? Have you ever been in a place you're like, I don't blame them for not trusting me. I don't trust me. I don't blame them for leaving me. I would leave me. Who am I? Am I a good person or not? Who am I? Here's David, a man after God's own heart, a man with such character and depth and power of heart that God was looking for a replacement for the leader of the nation. And he's like, there he is. That kind of heart that now has dehumanized people to the place he just takes this woman and does whatever he wants with her. We're asking that question, who am I? And we're asking the question, can we change? Do people change? Do people change? I don't know. It's a tough one. I mean, we're in church, so of course I'm supposed to say, yeah. I'm like, do people change? Not always. Have you ever been in a position where you wanted someone to change more than they did? Have you ever thought, if I just give them some money and I give them some backing, I give them some words of affirmation, give them some support, they're gonna change and a pep talk, and they don't change. They don't change. Have you ever questioned whether you can change? Can I change? Have you ever broken promises you made with yourself? More than once? That's why it gets harder over time to believe what God can still do with your life, because you're like, now I have a track record of patterns. I've had relapses. I've tried my best. Can I change? Is it even possible? Here you have David, whose heart is getting worse by the minute. He gets this woman pregnant. He realizes, I have to come up with a plan to cover my tracks. So he does. Comes up with plan A. Plan A is get her husband out of the war, bring him home, get him drunk, have him sleep with her, and now for the rest of the life, he'll think this is his baby. That was plan A. So he gets Uriah off the battlefield, gets him drunk, sends him to the house, and Uriah will not sleep with his wife because he's like, my boys, my comrades are out in battle. I'm not about to come home, get drunk, eat, and sleep with my wife while they're out there suffering. And so he slept on the doorstep. It's like, I'll send me back out to battle. I'm not that kind of dude. Plan A didn't work. Now, David, by the way, this shows us how much he is willing to dehumanize other people, because he thought nothing of putting this on Uriah, having Uriah raise his son all his life thinking it was his own. By the way, putting Bathsheba in a position so for the rest of her life she has to keep a secret from her husband. Do I tell him and walk through that mess? Or do I keep this a secret? And secrets create a wedge in your intimacy. He thought nothing of putting them in this position. He just did it to cover his tracks. It gets dark when you start dehumanizing people. Well, that plan didn't work, so it got darker. He said, I got to dispose of this guy. So he basically comes up with a plan to put Uriah in the hottest part of the battle and pull everybody back and make him a sacrificial lamb. And this is how twisted David, the man after God's own heart, this is how corrupt he became. He came up with the plan, wrote it, sealed it, gave it to Uriah and said, give this to your captain. Uriah, trusting the king, that the king had his best interest in mind, carried his own death plan to the general, and it was executed, and Uriah died. And then we get just maybe the grossest picture is once he dies and word comes back to David, they said, Uriah is dead. He says, oh, well, don't feel too bad about it, guys. You know, the sword gets one guy one day and somebody else the next day. It's just part of life. You know, it is what it is. Tell Joab, the general, don't take it too hard. Get back in the fight. Take the next city. It's all good. Sun will come up tomorrow. What? What have you become? What we have here is the equivalent of a spiritual heart attack, an event that should shock your system, that if you live through it, should wake you up to a place that you never thought you would be. It's a reality check. I didn't think I was capable of that. When I was the man after God's own heart out in the sheep field, I despised people that did that stuff. And as much as it causes you to feel overwhelmed or to feel shame, you have to thank God for the heart attack. Here's what I'm gonna tell you. Just file this one away. The wisest thing you can do is recognize the heart palpitation. In verse 3, the messenger comes back and says, oh, you wanna know who that lady is? That's this guy's daughter and this guy's wife. That's a heart palpitation. You should respond right there and go, I don't wanna keep writing the story I'm about to write. Wisdom, you recognize that over time. But what David did was he ignored it, and now he gets to chapter 12 where he has impregnated this woman, he's committed adultery, he's now committed murder, and he is dehumanizing one person after another. He's created a ripple effect. And God raises up somebody to give him a heart attack. The guy's name was Nathan the prophet. He comes to David, and masterfully, he goes to David and he says, David, we have a problem. David has no idea. He's been found out. He doesn't think anybody knows about this. But God sends Nathan. Nathan comes to him, he says, David, let me tell you about some shepherds. Think about that. What did David do before he was king? He was shepherd. He was a shepherd. What's Nathan doing? He's taking David back to the sheep field. He's taking David back to the place where God found him. There's a man after my own heart. He takes him back to the best version of himself. He takes him back. He said, there's these two shepherds. One of them had sheep on sheep on sheep on sheep. Man, he had these huge flocks. He had more sheep than he knew what to do with, and he had cattle, and he had cows, and he had all this stuff. And then there was this other guy, he had one little lamb, and he loved this lamb, and he raised this lamb, and he fed this lamb, and he cuddled with this lamb, and he felt deeply for this. It was his one lamb. Now to you and I, we're like, oh, lamb, it doesn't mean anything because we don't have lambs. But David was a shepherd and he knew what it was like. This is the dude who grabbed a lion by the jaw and beat it to death to save a wounded lamb. He takes him back to that guy. Remember when you would risk your life for a lamb? And now you're devouring people. What has happened? David doesn't know what's happening here. He says one guy has a bunch, one guy has one. He said the rich guy, the guy with all the lambs, had friends came in town, and instead of taking one from his flock, he could have spared a lamb, no problem. He goes to the one guy's lamb, his one precious lamb. He takes the lamb, and he kills the lamb, and he sacrifices, and he feeds and consumes this lamb. And it says in chapter 12 and verse 5, David became enraged. He's like, what? It says he became angry. He said, this man must die for that. He said, who does that? He must die for that. He said, he showed no mercy. He showed no empathy. And Nathan looked at him and said, I'm talking about you. That's what you did. You're the man. And David has what's essentially a spiritual heart attack. Oh my God. I have become the thing I never said I wanted to be. I have done things I thought I was not capable of. I have little by little, decision by decision, day after day, become something. And now he gets a reality check. Friend, I want to say to you, the natural tendency when you have a catastrophic event like that is to be overwhelmed with shame. But friend, I want to encourage you from the depths of my heart. If God sends a Nathan into your life to intersect the path that you're currently on, to give you a reality check, get on your knees and thank him. It's a gift. It's a gift. Nathan is a gift. And yeah, it hurts, and yeah, it hits hard, and yeah, it's devastating. But don't reject Nathan. Don't push him away, because that is an intersection. You're going to a place. It's getting darker and darker and darker, and God sends Nathans to intercept you. Say, no, that's you. That's you. And David now is in this place where he's got to figure out, what do I believe about? What is my expectation of what God can still do with my life? What am I going to do from here? I had a heart attack and I lived to tell about it. What now? Can I change? And it's in that moment that he writes Psalm 51. Psalm 51 in verse 1 says, have mercy on me, O God, because of your unfailing love. Notice David never stops believing in the unfailing love of God regardless of his failure. Friend, you got to hear that. Part of walking by faith is receiving the unfailing love of God when you're overwhelmed with your own failing. He never stopped believing in that. He said, because of your great compassion, blot out the stain of my sins. I don't want to live the rest of my life stained. I don't want to live the rest of my life feeling like I'm tainted by what I've done. Blot out the stain. He says in verse 2, wash me clean from my guilt. Purify me from my sin. For I recognize my rebellion. It haunts me day and night. I can't sleep. And then notice, I think he's still a little bit disoriented in verse 4. Look what he says. Against you and you alone have I sinned, he says. Well, that's not true, David. You didn't just sin against God. You sinned against Bathsheba. You sinned against Uriah. You sinned against yourself. You sinned against the nation that trusted you. You sinned against all kinds of people. You put people in position. The ripple effect is bigger than what you think. And yet he's working, he's repenting. He's trying to figure it out. He gets to verse 10, and this is it right here, man. This is it. This is it. This is where it hinges on what you do after the heart attack, what you do after the event. Am I going to change or am I not? People change. Do they change? No, not always. Sometimes they don't, but they can. You can change. Do you change? I don't know. It's up to you. What do you do now? Now, after the heart attack, after the event, this is what determines. He says in verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God. Create in me a clean heart. David came to the realization, he had a moment of clarity that the issue and the root of the behavior was in his heart. The very thing that caused God to select him, the very thing he had nurtured over years, from day in and day out, all of a sudden he showed up into a place where his heart had become tainted, sinful, impure, broken. And he recognized, how do I get to a different place? How do I move forward from here? He prayed the right prayer. Create in me, oh God, a clean heart. Notice he says, create in me a clean heart. He didn't just say, clean my heart. He's create. You got to there's some things that be created that weren't there. Create it, Lord. Create in me a clean heart. You cannot change the past, but God can change your heart, and that will change your future. Take that with you today. You cannot change the past. You cannot go back to verse 3 and respond to the palpitation. You can't go back and undo what you did with and to Bathsheba and Uriah and the whole deal. You can't change the past, but God can change your heart, and that will change your future. Raise your expectation about what God can still do. David said, create in me a clean heart, oh God. Then he says in verse 16, you do not desire a sacrifice, or I would offer you one. In other words, I can't buy my way out of this. I can't buy my way out of this. This isn't I did 40 years of screwing up, now I got to do 40 years of getting it right. He said that's not how it works. You don't want a burnt offering. Look what he says. The sacrifice you desire is a broken spirit. You will not reject a broken and repentant heart, oh God. And friend, I'll tell you, the reality of the path forward for both David and Bathsheba was the same prescription: to bring the broken heart, the broken spirit, and to bring it to God. That's the sacrifice he desires. If you think that in order for things to be redeemed in your life, that it's going to require you to do an equal amount of good to the bad that you've done, you will lower your expectation of what God is capable of. But if you believe in God's ability to redeem and restore and to do things that maybe took you decades to mess up, for him to turn it around much more quickly, and for him to use it in a much greater, grander way, to do exceeding and abundantly above what you would ask or think, to do something to take you places or do things differently, maybe even than how you would envision them from here. I encourage you to bring your broken and contrite heart to God, to allow him to heal you, and then to trust whatever comes out of a healed and whole heart, to trust what he can produce and what's next, to raise your expectation of what God can still do in your life. What's our action step? What's our call to action? It's not to try to work it off. It's to make this first step, which is this: to take a broken spirit, a contrite heart, to recognize that that's what gets God's attention. God's not that impressed with your resume or your skill set or your talent. He's not impressed or deterred by your reputation, what they say about you, what they think about you, or even what you think about yourself. What God wants from you is you to bring your heart and for him to restore it. I invite you to stand up on your feet today. I'm going to invite our prayer team to come forward. Let's take a few moments here and allow God to minister to each one of us. In the next moment, you can stay where you are and allow God to speak to you as an individual, or you can also come up. Our prayer team will be available to pray with you about anything you'd like to pray with. Let's take a moment.